So if you break a bone, an X-ray gives you this really clean binary answer.
Right, broken or not broken.
Exactly. It's comforting. You point to the jagged white line on the film and just say, well, there's the problem.
Yeah.
But what happens when you try to X-ray a whole society?
Oh, it gets messy fast.
Super messy. Today, we are taking 5 incredibly dense, highly respected academic study units and applying them to, one of the most famous stories ever told in the English language.
Charles Dickens' Great Expectations.
Right. And we're going to prove to you that this isn't like some wholesome, nostalgic coming-of-age story about a cute boy named Pip.
Definitely not.
No. It is a terrifying, blood-soaked psychological thriller about a society secretly funded by the criminal underworld.
Which is, I mean, a profound departure from how pop culture usually frames Dickens.
Oh, totally.
We tend to think of him as the author of cozy Christmas tales or, these simple morality plays.
The guy who wrote A Christmas Carol.
Exactly. But the documents we're analyzing today, they strip away that veneer entirely. Yeah. They look at the historical, the cultural, and the formal DNA of this novel to reveal something much darker and, frankly, much more relevant to the way we live today.
So if you are listening to this, you might be a student, right? Fueled entirely by caffeine, just staring down the barrel of a massive literature exam on Victorian fiction.
We've all been there.
Or, you might just be an insanely curious reader who wants to understand a classic on a genuine masterclass level.
Right.
Whichever it is, our mission for this deep dive is exactly the same.
By the time we finish, you won't just be able to summarize the plot.
No, that's not enough.
Yes.
You're going to understand the intricate mechanics of Victorian hustle culture, the subversive and genuinely horrifying history of the fairy tale, and why a story about a young man, improving himself, is actually a masterclass in total psychological disintegration.
But to do that, we have to establish a foundational rule for how we are reading this text today.
Okay, lay it on me.
So our sources draw on the literary critic Mikhail Bakhtin and the historian E.J. Hobsbawm.
Great names.
Right. And they make this crucial point. Literature never, ever exists in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You cannot separate a book from the specific economic and cultural moment that produced it.
I mean, I used to hear that all the time in school, right? That literature is a mirror reflecting society.
Sure, yeah.
But looking at these sources, that feels almost a bit too passive.
How do you mean?
It's not just a mirror. It's more like a sponge soaking up the toxic runoff of its economy.
Oh, I like that.
Right. You cannot possibly read Pip's intense obsession with acquiring wealth and status, what he calls his expectations, without understanding the predatory economic machine that was booming right outside Dickens's window in the 1850s and 60s.
That toxic runoff analogy is spot on.
Thanks.
To understand Kip's desires, we really have to understand the water he's swimming in.
Yeah.
And according to Hobsbawm's landmark work, Industry and Empire, mid-Victorian Britain was undergoing this massive economic shockwave.
Like a total transformation.
Exactly. They were transitioning out of the early, highly unstable phase of the Industrial Revolution.
Which was mostly textiles, right?
Right. Cotton mills, weaving, which was volatile and relied heavily on just the brutal exploitation of factory workers.
The kind of crushing poverty we associate with Oliver Twist.
Exactly. They're really early Dickens stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But by the 1850s, Britain enters a period of consolidated heavy industry.
Okay, so a shift.
A huge shift.
Yeah.
We are talking about the explosive growth of iron, coal, steel, and above all, the massive monopolistic expansion of the railways.
Wow.
This wasn't just a shift in what they produced, it was a shift in the sheer scale of wealth.
Right.
It created a phenomenal economic boom that completely rewired British society.
Because suddenly, it's not just factory owners getting rich anymore.
Exactly.
You have this massive need for white-collar workers. You need engineers to build the railways, accountants to manage the massive influx of capital, managers, clerks, lawyers.
The whole middle class is just exploding.
It's exploding. And that this wealth is being fueled not just internally, but by European exports and the aggressive, often really ruthless exploitation of colonial markets across the globe.
And when an economy explodes like that, it generates a new cultural mythology.
It has to justify itself.
Right. The defining ideology of this era became an absolute obsession with upward social mobility.
The idea that you can climb the ladder.
The belief that your birth no longer dictated your destiny.
Yeah.
Our sources point to a massively popular book published in 1859, which is just a year before Great Expectations began serialization.
Oh, perfect timing. What was it?
It was called Self-Help by Samuel Smiles.
Okay, I want to pause here and connect this directly to whoever is listening right now.
Please do.
Think about the algorithms on your social media feeds.
Oh, yeah.
How many, rise and grind, Sigma mindset, or passive income videos do you scroll past every single day?
Too many.
Exactly. Samuel Smiles was essentially the 1850s equivalent of a hustle culture influencer.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Right. He was preaching this gospel that if you just work hard enough, employ enough grit, and maximize your productivity, you will inevitably rise to the top.
He was giving a moral framework to economic ambition.
Yeah.
Smiles argued that absolutely anyone could improve their station in life through thrift, diligence, and sheer force of will.
It was basically the Victorian equivalent of the American dream.
Exactly. The academic units quote a speech from Lord Palmerston, who was the prime minister at the time.
Oh, wow. Straight from the top.
Straight from the top. Palmerston stands up and publicly declares that every single British individual is, quote, constantly trying to raise himself in the social scale by the steady and energetic exertion of moral and intellectual faculties.
It sounds incredibly democratic.
Does.
Like the ultimate bootstraps narrative.
Yeah.
Your moral virtue translates directly into social elevation.
Right.
But the sources highlight a massive, almost comical contradiction sitting right at the center of this entire belief system.
It is a glaring contradiction.
And this is where we bring in the political scientist Walter Bagehot and a wildly popular novel from that exact era called John Halifax, Gentlemen.
Right, so let's unpack that contradiction.
Please.
The story of John Halifax, and really the broader Smilesian ideology, champions the gritty, sweat-stained virtues of the self-made man.
Work hard, get dirty.
Exactly. Work, thrift, enterprise, and productivity are held up as the absolute highest moral goods.
Right.
But we have to ask, what is the actual reward for all this noble labor? Where is the finish line?
And this is the crazy part. The finish line is an aristocratic lifestyle where you never have to work a single day for the rest of your life.
It's completely paradoxical.
It makes no sense. You grind 80-hour weeks in a soot-filled railway office, you extol the virtues of hard labor, just so you can magically transform into a 19th century Kardashian who pretends that manual labor doesn't even exist.
It is a profound hypocrisy.
Yeah.
The new captains of industry were generating unprecedented wealth. But instead of taking pride in the entrepreneurial grit that got them there, they immediately tried to erase the evidence of their own hustle.
They wanted to hide it.
Exactly. They wanted to emulate the lazy, entrenched, aristocratic class that they had just economically replaced.
Wow.
They traded the values of the entrepreneur for the mystique of gentlemanliness.
Wait, let's define that, because when I hear the word gentleman, I just think of, someone who opens doors and uses polite manners.
Sure, the modern definition.
Right. But in the 19th century, it was an entire economic classification, wasn't it?
It was a heavily guarded status symbol.
Okay.
In the mid-Victorian sense, gentlemanliness was an ideal based entirely on a leisured lifestyle.
Meaning no work.
Exactly. It explicitly rejected productiveness. To be a gentleman meant you had a, quote, liberal outlook rather than a professional, grinding commitment to a trade. Your hands were clean. Your wealth was supposed to appear natural and effortless, completely divorced from the sweating laborers who actually produced it.
So we essentially have this society built on a massive lie.
Yeah.
Work hard so you can pretend you've never worked a day in your life.
That's the goal.
And that brings us directly back to Pip. Because if the Victorian era promised that hard work naturally results in respectable gentlemanliness, well, Dickens spends the entirety of Great Expectations violently tearing that promise to shreds.
He really does. And to truly appreciate the violence of Dickens's critique here, the academic units instruct us to look backwards for a moment.
Okay, backwards where?
We need to contrast Pip's journey with one of Dickens's own earlier heroes, David Copperfield.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
If you are preparing for an exam on Victorian literature, mastering this specific contrast is absolute gold.
Pay attention, folks.
It shows the evolution of Dickens' own political and social disillusionment over time.
Let's look at David Copperfield then. That novel is essentially the poster boy for the successful middle-class work ethic.
Totally.
David goes through hardships, sure, but he has a rock-solid support system. He's got his formidable aunt, Betsy Trotwood,
She's the best.
He's got his endlessly loyal friend Tommy Traddles, his eventual wife Agnes. Every single one of these characters represents stable, productive, middle-class values.
And they constantly encourage his work ethic.
Right. And importantly, in David's world, working hard actually pays off.
Yeah.
It leads to genuine inner growth and social stability.
David is surrounded by a milieu that sustains that Smilesian parable of self-improvement.
But David does face temptation. Right?
Yeah.
Like he has that wealthy aristocratic friend, Skeerforth.
He does. And Steerforth represents the toxic, unproductive, purely aesthetic lifestyle of the upper class.
Right.
But notice how Dickens handles Steerforth in that earlier novel. The narrative manages the danger.
How so?
It pushes Steerforth to the margins, exposes his moral bankruptcy, and eventually eliminates him.
Okay, so the middle-class virtues triumph cleanly at the end.
Exactly. But in Great Expectations, Dickens takes everything that was marginal in David Copperfield and just shoves it into the dead center of the plot.
Yeah, because Pip has absolutely zero middle-class support.
Yeah.
There is no Betsy Trotwood waiting in the wings to save him. When we meet Pip, he is an orphan being raised by his abusive sister and her husband, the village blacksmith, Joe Gargery.
Right.
And his mentors outside the home are even worse. He has the pompous, bullying Uncle Pumblechook, and then, of course, he is introduced to the terrifying, aristocratic, decaying world of Satis House, ruled by Miss Havisham and her adopted daughter, Estella.
And because of this environment, Pip's entire definition of improvement is warped from the start.
Right.
When Pip decides he wants to rise in the world, he isn't aspiring to be a hardworking, middle-class writer like David Copperfield.
No, he doesn't want to earn his way.
Not at all. He is aspiring directly to the arrogant, toxic, unearned gentility of Satis House.
And this brings up a concept in the sources that I think is just really fascinating, the progressive educative plot.
It's a crucial term.
Can we unpack that?
Yeah.
Because it sounds incredibly academic, but the mechanics of it are actually pretty simple when you look at how stories are built.
Let's break it down. The progressive educative plot is essentially the standard blueprint for a coming-of-age story, what the Germans call a Bildungsroman.
Right.
In these traditional stories, the hero moves from poverty or ignorance into a state of educated respectability.
A clean upward trajectory.
Exactly. But to make that narrative arc look clean and progressive, the author usually has to perform a bit of a sleight of hand.
How do they do?
They have to erase the hero's embarrassing low-class past.
Right. The narrative literally hides the evidence.
Yes.
The sources point out that in David Copperfield, young David is forced into grueling child labor at a blacking factory, right? And he's working alongside a gritty street urchin named Mealy Potatoes.
Great Dickensian name.
Classic. But once David is rescued by his Aunt Betsy and enters middle-class society, Mealy Potatoes completely vanishes from the novel.
He's gone.
The past is silenced so that the hero's progress looks inevitable and unblemished.
But Dickens outright refuses to grant Pip that narrative mercy in Great Expectations.
He does not let him off the hook.
No. Pip's past absolutely refuses to stay silent. It constantly erupts into his present to embarrass him and expose the total artificiality of his new gentlemanly status.
Oh, yeah.
And the study units focus on two incredibly vivid, painful scenes to demonstrate this. The first is a moment of pure physical comedy with a devastating class critique.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
The scene with Crab's boy.
Oh, man, this scene is so agonizing to read.
It really is.
So, just to set it up, Pip has just come into his money. He believes he has been chosen by a wealthy benefactor to become a gentleman.
He's feeling very full of himself.
Very. He gets fitted for this ridiculous, expensive suit of clothes, and he decides to walk through his grimy hometown, projecting what he believes is a serene and unconscious dignity.
He thinks he looks amazing.
Yeah, he's actively, desperately trying to ignore the working class people he actually grew up with.
And Trab's boy, who is the local tailor's apprentice, a kid who is essentially Pip's working class mirror image, he just destroys him.
Completely destroys him. Trab's boy sees Pip strutting down the street, and instead of showing respect, he stages this loud theatrical parody of Pip's snobbery.
It's so funny.
He feigns absolute terror at Pip's newfound majesty, like his knees knocking together in mock fear.
Yeah.
And then he pulls his shirt collar up to his ears, waves his hand dismissively, and struts down the street, wriggling his elbows, yelling to a crowd of onlookers, "Don't know ya. Upon my soul, don't know ya."
It is a brilliant, vicious moment of what we might call parodic reenactment.
Right.
Because remember, earlier in the novel, the aristocratic Estella had coldly told Pip that his working-class companions were unfit for him.
Yes, and Pip internalized that.
Deeply. But Trav's boy takes those high-minded elite codes of genteel exclusivity and just drags them kicking and screaming straight into the gutter.
It totally deflates Pip. From the perspective of the working-class street, Pip's new aristocratic codes aren't noble or sophisticated.
Not at all.
They're exposed as ridiculous theatrical posturing.
Exactly. Trav's boy acts as a mechanism to prove that Pip's attempt to wipe his past from his consciousness isn't some natural progression of character.
Well,
It is a profound moral failure. The progressive plot is breaking down in real time.
and if the Trav's boy scene is embarrassing, the scenes with Joe Gargery are just flat out heartbreaking.
Oh, they are tough to read.
Joe is the blacksmith who protected Pip from his abusive sister. He is arguably the moral center of the entire novel.
Absolutely.
And the sources emphasize that Joe's entire worldview is built on a deep, unpretentious egalitarianism.
Yeah.
He constantly tells young Pip that they are equals and the best of friends.
Joe's language is crucial here. When Joe and Pip are at the forge, their conversation flows freely.
It's natural.
It isn't structured by rigid social rules. It's based on shared suffering, affection, and solidarity.
But the moment Joe is forced to interact with the hierarchical world of the upper classes, he literally breaks down.
He short circuits.
There's this scene where Joe is called to visit Miss Havisham at Sada's house. And Sada's house operates on the strict, coded rules of aristocratic superiority.
Right.
And Joe is completely paralyzed by it. He becomes totally speechless. He looks like a bird with his feathers ruffled.
It's a great description.
He is so intimidated by the social dynamics that he can't even speak directly to Miss Havisham. He keeps answering her questions by talking to Pip instead.
Joe is utterly incapable of navigating the conventions of gentility because gentility requires recognizing and performing inequality.
Oh, that's a great point.
Joe only knows how to perform equality.
And it gets so much worse later in the novel.
It does.
Pip is now living in London as an educated, wealthy gentleman, and Joe comes to visit him.
It's a disaster.
The tension is unbearable. Joe is wearing his uncomfortable Sunday clothes. He keeps dropping his hat. But the most painful part is his language.
You're right.
He keeps calling Pip sir.
And Pip is deeply annoyed by this. He thinks Joe is just being foolish and unrefined.
Yeah.
But the academic units point out something vital here. It is the unlettered, uneducated Joe, not the highly educated Pip, who recognizes the truth of the situation.
What truth?
By calling Pip sir, Joe is acknowledging that Pip's new status has fundamentally destroyed their deep, undemanding, personal relationship.
Wow. So the conventions of gentility simply cannot accommodate the easy, affectionate egalitarianism of the blacksmith's forge.
They are incompatible.
To become a gentleman, Pip basically has to become alienated from the only person who ever truly loved him.
That is the core tragedy of Pip's ascent.
Now, I'm going to push back on this reading just a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Because it's very easy for us to sit here 160 years later and just call Pip a shallow, status-obsessed snob.
Yeah.
But when you actually read Dickens' prose, you realize Pip isn't just lusting after money. He genuinely associates gentility with romance, with fine feelings, with a deeper, almost spiritual capacity for love.
That's true.
Like, when he looks at ships out on the sea with their white sails, he immediately thinks of Miss Havisham and Estella. He equates their wealth with everything that is picturesque and emotionally rich.
Right.
He sincerely believes that being a gentleman means you have a more refined, sensitive soul.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that wasn't just Pip's personal delusion. That was a pervasive cultural myth of the 19th century.
Oh, really?
Yes. The sources bring in a historical account of a man named Count d'Orsay to explain this.
Okay, let's talk about Count d'Orsay because this guy sounds wild.
Count d'Orsay was a famous, real-life, aristocratic dandy in London.
Okay.
He was known for practicing what was called the haute-école style of horsemanship.
Fancy.
Very fancy. He dressed with absolute impeccable perfection, and he projected an aura of commanding superiority wherever he went. And the historian Geoffrey Best notes that the mid-Victorians, even the working classes, were intensely fascinated by the aristocracy because they genuinely believed these upper-class figures were almost a different species of human.
Wait, like biologically different?
Essentially, yes. They believed the aristocracy were more handsome, more graceful, and crucially, that they loved more passionately than lesser-bred mortals.
Okay, I need to ELI5 this haute école mystique for a second.
Please.
It's essentially the belief that your external aesthetics directly reflect your internal soul.
Exactly.
If your cravat is tied perfectly, and your posture is flawless, and your wealth allows you to surround yourself with beautiful things, then your heart must be capable of a deeper, more profound kind of love than some guy sweating in a coal mine.
That is exactly the cultural myth Pip buys into.
Wow.
But Dickens sets up this myth for the sole purpose of shattering it completely through the character of Estella.
Right.
Estella is the ultimate embodiment of the aristocratic ideal. She is physically beautiful, she has absolute poise, and her dresses are flawless.
But internally,
Internally, she is emotionally dead.
because she has been raised by Miss Havisham to be a weapon against men.
Exactly.
She has been raised to have this air of, quote, completeness and superiority.
We mentioned Bakhtin earlier, right?
Yeah.
Well, Bakhtin has this concept of authoritative discourse. It's a way of speaking that allows for no debate, no vulnerability, no exchange.
It's a wall.
Exactly. Estella's discourse is purely authoritative and undiscussable. She allows no other voices to penetrate her consciousness.
She literally tells Pip to his face, quote, "You address nothing in my breast, you touch nothing there."
It's chilling.
It is a devastating moment for Pip because it just breaks his entire worldview.
Dickens is revealing a terrifying truth here. The perfection of aristocratic dress and the capacity to love are not complementary traits.
They're opposites.
They are mutually exclusive. Estella's total immunity to deep feeling is the indispensable precondition of the cold elegance that attracted Pip in the first place.
Oh, that's heavy.
Right. If she could feel empathy, she couldn't maintain the rigid superiority of her class. The very qualities that make up the genteel mystique are the tools Dickens uses to demystify it.
Okay, this is blowing my mind.
Yeah.
We are seeing what Dickens is doing.
Right.
He's dismantling the improvement plot. He's destroying the myth of the noble aristocrat.
Yes.
But to truly understand this novel on a masterclass level, we need to understand how he does it. We need to look at his actual literary tools.
Right.
Because the literary world Dickens was operating in was messy, chaotic, and wildly different from the writers who came just a little before him.
Definitely. And to illustrate this shift in how novels were built, the academic units ask us to compare Dickens with Jane Austen.
Okay, classic matchup.
Austen's novels, think Mansfield Park or Pride and Prejudice, operate almost entirely within the network of upper and middle class homes.
Drawing rooms, country estates.
Exactly. The philosopher Jürgen Habermas described this social arena as the bourgeois public sphere.
Let me jump in with an analogy here because reading Jane Austen is a very specific experience.
Go for it.
It's like looking into a beautifully constructed, hermetically sealed terrarium.
Oh, I love that.
Right. Everything inside that glass box makes logical sense.
Yeah.
Take Lady Bertram in Mansfield Park. She sits on a sofa, doing needlework, thinking about her pug,
Very Austen.
and the signs of her wealth, her languid posture, her expensive clothes, her perfectly structured syntax, are completely consistent.
Right.
You would never, ever have a supernatural cackling witch or a gritty, knife-wielding street criminal suddenly crash through the window into Lady Bertram's drawing room. It would destroy the entire ecosystem of the novel.
Precisely. Austen relies on a closed, highly consistent domestic world.
Yeah.
But Dickens emerged from a completely different cultural domain. He came out of a chaotic, booming, popular print market that was born from what the cultural critic Walter Benjamin called the age of mechanical reproduction.
Okay, Walter Benjamin. This is heavy critical theory. We need to break down mechanical reproduction and explain how a change in printing technology actually changes the way a story is told.
The sources trace this back to the 18th century painter William Hogarth.
Okay.
Before Hogarth, the art world was highly restricted. A painter would be commissioned by a single, wealthy aristocrat to paint one unique oil painting, which would hang in one private mansion.
Right.
The art had what Benjamin calls an aura, a sense of unique, almost sacred distance.
It belonged exclusively to the elite.
Right. But Hogarth did something revolutionary. He created a series of 6 paintings called The Harlot's Progress, which told a gritty, serialized story of a country girl falling into prostitution in London.
Sounds intense.
It was. But instead of just selling the original paintings to our rich patron, Hogarth engraved them onto copper plates.
Oh, so he could print them.
Exactly. He used early mechanical reproduction to produce multiple cheap printed copies and sold them directly to the general public.
So Benjamin argues that by mechanically reproducing the art, you, quote, smash the aura.
Yes.
You take the art out of the locked aristocratic gallery and just throw it into the messy, chaotic environment of the everyday consumer.
And this smashing of the aura leads to what Benjamin calls reactivation.
What does that mean?
Because the art is out in the public, the themes, characters, and visual motifs don't just stay on the page. They get adapted, stolen, and mutated.
They go viral, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Right.
Hogarth prints were turned into stage melodramas, pantomimes, penny dreadfuls, and eventually the serialized novels of the 19th century.
It's like a massive 19th century open source project.
Exactly.
Genres are constantly colliding.
Yeah.
You have high drama mixing with low comedy, realism bumping up against the grotesque.
Right.
And that is the exact literary ecosystem Charles Dickens grew up in. His novels were published in cheap, weekly or monthly installments. They are formally open-ended.
Very much so.
They absorb expressive modes from radical political satire, cheap theater, and gritty street sketches.
And this formal open-endedness has a profound impact on how Dickens handles realism.
Okay.
Which brings us to the French literary theorist Roland Barthes.
Okay, I'm going to act as the proxy for the listener here,
Yeah.
because when I hear literary realism, I assume it just means the author is describing the world exactly as it looks outside their window. It's just a mirror.
Right, that's the common assumption.
What is Barthes saying that complicates this?
Barthes argues that literary realism is actually an illusion.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it is a highly constructed effect created by what he calls the solidarity of signs.
Solidarity is something.
Right. In a realist novel by Austen, or the French writer Balzac, the reality effect relies on all the connotations matching up perfectly.
Okay.
Wealth is communicated through a network of agreeing signs. The character uses refined syntax, they wear consistent high-quality clothing, they live in an appropriate architectural setting.
Wait, let me see if I can ELI5 this solidarity of signs thing.
Please do.
Think of it like watching a movie set in a billionaire's mansion. The set designer gives the billionaire a tailored Italian suit, a crystal whiskey decanter, and a sweeping view of the ocean.
Right.
Those signs have solidarity. They make sense together. But if the camera pans and there's a cheap, dirty plastic lawn chair sitting in the middle of the mahogany living room, your brain instantly rejects the reality of the scene.
The illusion breaks.
Exactly. The signs conflict and the illusion breaks.
Mm.
Austen makes sure there are absolutely no plastic lawn chairs in her drawing rooms.
That is a perfect analogy. Austen maintains the solidarity of signs.
Right.
But because Dickens's form is so open and chaotic, born from that mechanically reproduced market, he totally rejects this solidarity.
He puts the lawn chair in the living room.
He does. He refuses to keep his signs consistent. He doesn't want the reader to have the comfort of a closed, predictable, realistic world. He wants to disturb us.
So how does he do that? If he breaks the rules of realism, what does he replace them with?
He imports a completely different ancient genre straight into the middle of his realistic novel.
Which is?
He imports the fairy tale.
Okay, I have to push back here. We are talking about a novel that critiques the socioeconomic foundations of the Victorian industrial boom. And you're telling me Dickens drops Hansel and Gretel in the middle of it.
Basically, yes.
Isn't that just bad, inconsistent writing? Like literary critics like Franco Moretti and Bruno Bettelheim have actually attacked Dickens for this, haven't they?
They have, yes.
They argue that relying on fairy tales makes the novel infantile.
Right. Bettelheim specifically argues that fairy tales are for children because they divide the world into simple, digestible binaries, pure good versus pure evil, and they lack any adult moral ambiguity.
Right.
He claims Dickens is retreating into a childish fantasy.
But the sources we are looking at counter that critique completely, relying on the historian Herman Rebel.
Yes, Herman Rebel's history completely dismantles Bettelheim's argument.
How so?
Rebel points out that Bettelheim is analyzing fairy tales only after they were sanitized for middle-class nurseries.
Right.
Originally, before the printing press, fairy tales belonged to harsh, preliterate peasant cultures.
Right.
They were subversive, often brutal ways for the poor and the marginalized to speak to each other about survival, famine, and predatory power dynamics.
Right. The original fairy tales are absolutely terrifying.
They are.
People are getting eaten, burned alive, abandoning their children in the woods because they're starving.
Exactly.
It was only later that collectors, like the Grimm brothers, systematically edited out the grim realities, added Christian morals, and made them suitable for middle-class children's books.
And Charles Dickens was sitting right at the crossroads of this cultural evolution.
Okay.
His childhood nurse, a working-class woman named Mary, used to terrify the young Charles with these macabre, nightmarish folk tales before bed.
Oh, wow.
He absorbed the dark, ambiguous, deeply unsettling elements of the original peasant fairy tales.
And he takes those dark, horrifying folktale elements and uses them to completely shatter the solidarity of signs in his novel.
He does.
And nowhere is this more brilliantly executed than in his description of Satis House, where Miss Havisham lives.
Satis House is the ultimate visual shock. If Jane Austen represents consistent domestic realism, Satis House represents the violent, nightmarish collision of signs.
Let's set the scene for the listener because it is one of the most famous images in literature.
Go for it.
Pip, a poor boy, is brought to the house of an elite, incredibly wealthy woman. Based on the rules of realism, the signs should point to elegance, vitality, and life.
Right.
And the materials are there, right? Rich satins, lace, silks, a bridal dress, jewels scattered on the dressing table, a massive wedding cake in the banquet room.
But Dickens juxtaposes all of those signs of upper-class wealth with the horrifying signs of death, decay, and madness.
It's so creepy.
Everything that should be white, the dress, the lace, the cake, is faded and yellow. Spiders and mice crawl through the rotting cake. The bride herself is withered, like a skeleton. Her sunken eyes are the only things that still shine.
Miss Havisham tells Pip that the day she was jilted at the altar, time stopped in the house. She tells him that her wedding day is her dying day. The bridal clothes she wears are literally grave clothes.
Exactly.
By fusing the signs of immense upper-class wealth with the signs of a rotting corpse, Dickens makes it utterly impossible for Pip, or the reader, to take the superiority of the gentlefolk for granted.
The signifiers in Satis House carry the possibility of their own reversal. Wealth equals death.
But Pip doesn't realize this immediately, does he?
No, he doesn't.
He is a young boy, and he is essentially misreading his own life. He thinks he has wandered into a sanitized, middle-class Disney movie.
Right.
He looks at this horrifying wealthy woman and thinks, she is my magical fairy godmother. She's going to make me rich.
It's completely delusional.
He literally refers to himself in the text as the young knight of romance who is destined to marry the Princess Estella and restore the desolate house to its former glory.
He's reading his life through the lens of the sanitized, middle-class fairy tale. But Dickens traps him in a brutal original Brothers Grimm nightmare. Right. The Russian formalists and Bakhtin talk about a literary technique called deformation.
Deformation? What's that?
Deformation is the process of displacing standard, comfortable plot expectations in order to transfer a radical new ideological value to the reader.
So Dickens deliberately sets up this formulaic, pleasant fairy tale expectation. The poor boy, the fairy godmother, the princess. Specifically so he can violently deform it later.
Exactly.
He uses the expectation of a benevolent fairy godmother to expose the moral bankruptcy of the elite.
Yes. When Pick is older, he finally learns the true identity of his wealthy benefactor. It isn't the aristocratic Miss Havisham at all.
No.
And in that moment, the simple good-bad binary of the fairy tale is smashed forever.
But wait, if Pip's entire worldview, his entire identity as a gentleman, is built on this fairy tale logic, what happens to his psyche when that illusion shatters?
It's not pretty.
Does he just dust himself off, adapt to the new reality, and keep moving forward?
No, and that is the most radical part of the book. He doesn't adapt. He completely disintegrates mentally. When the fairy tale shatters, Great Expectations stops being a standard coming-of-age story about a young man building his character, and it becomes a dark, feverish story about a young man suffering a total psychological breakdown.
To understand how unusual this is for a Victorian novel, the sources use another brilliant comparison.
Right.
They look at the philosopher John Stuart Mill, who wrote a famous autobiography during this period.
Yes.
Mill describes experiencing a profound, paralyzing psychological crisis in his youth. But for Mill, the crisis was part of an additive, constructive process.
Yes. Mill used his mental breakdown to achieve what the text calls a desiderated balance.
Meaning?
He realized his education was too strictly intellectual, so he learned to add poetry and feelings to his culture.
Ah, okay.
In the mainstream Bildungsroman, the traditional coming-of-age novel crises are meant to be integrated. They impart solidity, wisdom, and stability to the hero's final, mature character.
The crisis makes you stronger. But in Great Expectations, the disclosure, the pivotal moment when the secret of the plot is revealed, does not integrate Pip's character.
Not at all.
It utterly destroys his sense of self. Pip discovers that his anonymous benefactor isn't the aristocratic Miss Havisham. It is Abel Magwitch, an escaped violent convict that Pip helped on the marshes when he was a child.
Everything he knows is a lie.
Pip's entire refined, gentlemanly lifestyle has been funded by the illicit labor of a hardened criminal.
And suddenly, Pip is left with absolutely no home in the world.
None.
He is too deeply, inextricably tied to a criminal to remain in polite, high society. But he has alienated Joe and Biddy so completely with his snobbery that he cannot possibly return to the innocence of the blacksmith's forge.
He's stuck in the middle.
He is trapped in a void.
The pacing of Book 3 of the novel brilliantly reflects this total loss of stability, too.
It really does.
The leisurely, descriptive pace of the earlier chapters just vanishes. Book 3 is feverish. It hodls Pip from one traumatic, disorienting experience to another. The literary critic, Franco Moretti, notes that the English Bildungsroman usually aims to offer the hero the, quote, comfort of civilization.
You grow up, you get a job, you settle into a comfortable house.
Exactly. But Book 3 of Great Expectations violently strips Pip of all comfort, leaving him with an overwhelming, suffocating sense of homelessness.
The study units highlight an amazing, haunting detail to prove this psychological untethering.
What's the detail?
Pip leaves London to visit Miss Havisham in Kent, to confront her about the lie she let him believe.
Right.
Afterwards, his mind is so frantic that he exhaustedly walks all the way back from Kent to London. He arrives at the city gates after midnight, physically destroyed.
Just exhausted.
And the night watchman hands him a note from his friend Wemmick.
And the note simply says, don't go home.
Now, from a purely mechanical plot perspective, the note is basically a false alarm. Wemmick is warning Pip that his London apartment is being watched by the authorities who are looking for Magwitch.
Right. Practical advice.
But psychologically, that note is a devastating hammer blow.
Because Pip is forced to sleep in a dingy, oppressive, bug-infested inn called the Hummums.
The Hums.
And as he tries to sleep, that phrase, don't go home, begins to torture him. He says it plates itself around his consciousness like a physical bodily pain.
It's obsessive.
The phrase becomes a, quote, vast shadowy verb. He repeats to himself, I may not, cannot, would not, and should not go home.
That is the reality of his existence now. The command not to go home isn't just about his apartment. It's an existential decree.
Wow.
He is completely untethered from the world.
And this psychological untethering reaches its terrifying climax a few chapters later at the sluice house by the lime kiln.
Oh, this scene.
Pip is lured out to the dark, fargy marshes of his childhood by a fake letter, and he is captured and tied up by Orlick, a brutal, resentful journeyman who used to work at Joe's forge.
We have to talk about how controversial this scene was when the novel was published.
Why?
Mrs. Oliphant, a very prominent contemporary reviewer, hated this scene. She complained that the Orlick encounter was an arbitrary stoppage. She saw it as just a sensational, meaningless distraction from the main plot, a cheap thriller tactic to keep serialized readers buying the next issue.
And if you are only reading the book for plot mechanics, she's right. Orlick has nothing to do with Magwitch or Estella.
Right.
But if you look at it through the lens of psychological disintegration, as our sources do, it is a masterpiece of artistic construction.
It is.
Orlick doesn't just threaten to kill Pip. He threatens to erase him from the universe completely.
Orlick stands over Pip, drinking liquor, working himself into a murderous rage, and he tells Pip he's going to throw his body into the roaring lime kiln outside the shack.
So brutal.
So there won't be a single bone or rag of clothing left to prove Pip ever existed. Orlick says Pip will be transformed into the sluggish, stifling smoke coming out of the kiln.
It is the ultimate threat of physical and historical dissolution. Pip is facing the horrifying prospect of dying in the dark, without leaving a trace, realizing that his entire, improved, gentlemanly life amounted to absolutely nothing more than toxic vapor.
It's the physical manifestation of his psychological erasure.
Pip is miraculously rescued at the last second, but the psychological damage is done.
Oh, yeah.
Immediately after the kiln scene and Magwitch's subsequent capture by the police, Pip falls into a severe, prolonged physical delirium. He is bedridden with a raging fever.
His brain just shatters. He hallucinates Miss Havisham burning alive in an iron furnace. The stifling smoke of the lime kiln mixes with his reality.
He forgets his own name.
He reverts to the helpless dependency of a child.
The sources argue a profound point here. This delirium isn't just a medical symptom of illness. It is the actual compositional method of Book 3.
What do they mean by that?
Dickens is entirely replacing the careful, step-by-step, realistic integration of the standard coming-of-age novel with a narrative method aimed at radical disordering.
Ah.
The narrative itself breaks down alongside Pip's mind.
Okay, this brings us to the ultimate revelation of the deep dive.
Let's do it.
We've seen the symptoms, the shattered fairy tale, the psychological disintegration, the exposure of the hustle culture hypocrisy.
Right.
But we have to diagnose the root cause. Why must Pip disintegrate so completely? Why is Dickens so fiercely determined to smash the improvement plot into a million pieces?
What's the answer?
The answer lies in the secret engine that runs this entire society. The foundation of Victorian respectability is crime.
Yes, the devastating truth Pip discovers, and the truth Dickens forces his readers to confront, is that the pristine, polite, respectable Victorian society they are so proud of is secretly funded, sustained, and structured by the very criminal underworld it pretends to abhor.
This represents a massive evolution in Dickens's own thinking.
How so?
Think back to his early novels like Oliver Twist or The Old Curiosity Shop.
Okay.
The criminals in those books, like the pickpocket master Fagin or the malicious dwarf Quilp, are fascinating, vivid characters, but they are marginalized aberrations.
They're on the fringes.
Exactly. They operate in the dark slums, entirely outside the boundaries of respectable society. They are the exception, not the rule.
But by the time Dickens writes Great Expectations in the 1860s, his view has darkened significantly.
Significantly.
Crime has moved from the margins to the very center of the system. It is integral to the functioning of the official elite.
Right.
And we see this most powerfully articulated through the character of Abel Magwitch.
When we first meet Magwitch in Chapter 1, he is the ultimate terrifying other.
He's scary.
He is an escaped convict in a coarse gray outfit with a great iron shackled to his leg, limping and shivering in the graveyard. And crucially, we later learn he is associated with Australia.
The sources bring in Robert Hughes's phenomenal history of Australia, The Fatal Shore, to explain exactly what Australia meant to the Victorian psyche.
It's an important context.
It wasn't just another colony. It was a dystopian thief colony. Hughes brilliantly describes it as a cloaca, a massive sewer spinning at the outer rim of the world, kept deliberately invisible, filled with what polite society considered its filthy and unnameable excrement.
Magwitch represents everything the Victorians desperately wanted to push away and ignore.
Yeah.
He is what the legal system at the time called an exhibition.
An exhibition.
Yeah. His heavy iron legs, his coarse, weathered skin, his lack of manners, they mark him biologically and culturally as a monster. He is put on display in the courtroom to prove that the justice system is keeping the monsters at bay.
But Dickens completely flips the script.
He does.
When Magwitch actually sits down and tells the story of his life to Pip, it's not a story of monstrous, innate evil.
Yeah.
It's a tragic story of systemic poverty and a relentless, inescapable legal machine.
Magwitch's biography is heartbreaking. He tells Pip, quote, "I was took up. To that extent, I regularly growed up took up. He was a ragged little orphan creature who was punished simply for tramping, begging, and trying to survive on the streets. He commits petty crimes out of necessity, but the law ensures he is constantly in and out of jail."
And here, the academic units introduce the philosopher Michel Foucault and his highly influential work, Discipline and Punish.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Foucault makes a radical argument about how the legal system functions. He argues that the penal system doesn't actually want to eliminate crime.
Wait, really? Because that sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right, but he says it wants to manage it by actively creating recidivism.
Creating repeat offenders.
Exactly. By forcing poor people into a closed, inescapable milieu of delinquency in jail and out of jail, exactly as Magwitch describes, official society achieves two vital goals.
Let's break those down.
Sure.
First, by pathologizing the poor and creating this highly visible, terrifying figure of the hardened criminal, the elite get to displace their own much larger illegalities.
A misdirection.
They can point at Magwitch and his leg irons and say to the public, "Look at the monster. We must protect you from him," while entirely ignoring the massive systemic corruption happening in their own railway boardrooms, banks, and law offices.
It's the ultimate misdirection.
Precisely. And the second goal is even more insidious. By maintaining this closed, marginalized criminal underworld, the respectable society can penetrate it, place it under constant surveillance, and ultimately use it for its own profit.
And no one embodies this parasitic relationship more perfectly than the terrifying lawyer, Mr. Jaggers, and his clerk, Wemmick.
Jaggers is such an incredible character. The British legal system claims to be an objective, majestic institution based on a strict line of fact.
Blind justice?
Supposedly.
Yeah.
But Jaggers wins all his cases using what they call Newgate intelligence. Newgate being the most notorious squalid prison in London.
Right.
Jaggers isn't operating above the criminals on some moral high ground. He is deeply, intimately embedded in their dirt. He bribes witnesses, he threatens people, he manipulates the truth.
There's an incredibly dark comic scene where a nervous client comes into Jagger's office with a witness who's prepared to swear to anything, meaning he will commit perjury to win the case.
Right, whatever it takes.
Jaggers yells at the client to maintain plausible deniability, but the client admits they have dressed the fake witness up in nice clothes to look like a, quote, "spectable pie man."
They literally put a criminal in a costume to fool the judge.
Exactly. The legal system of respectable arbitration is shown to be entirely dependent on theatrical lies generated by the criminal underworld. The justice system is a total farce.
And if Jibers represents the professional exploitation of crime, his clerk Wemmick represents how crime infiltrates the domestic sphere.
Oh, Wemmick's house.
We have to talk about Wemmick's house in Walworth, which he called his castle.
Wemmick's castle is a literal microcosm of Victorian society. He tries so hard to separate his brutal, cynical work life in London from his idyllic home life.
He really tries.
He literally builds a moat and a drawbridge around his tiny house in the suburbs to keep the city out. But when you look inside his house, the boundary is completely collapsed.
Inside his home, Wemmick lovingly curates and displays a collection of curiosities.
Yeah.
But look at what those curiosities actually are.
Yeah.
He has the pen used to commit a famous forgery. He has a distinguished razor that was used in a high-profile murder. He has manuscript confessions written by condemned prisoners on the eve of their execution.
And he mixes these gruesome murder weapons with cute, sentimental little domestic oddities, like tobacco stoppers carved by his sweet, elderly father.
It's so jarring.
He literally serves Pip a roasted fowl for dinner and cheerfully mentions that it was bought with money given to him by a dead prisoner.
Wow.
Wemmick's entire guiding philosophy is acquiring what he calls portable property from the condemned men he works with.
Wemmick renders the unmentionable, horrifying ties between crime and respectability totally familiar and everyday.
He normalizes it.
His museum makes visible the countless invisible threads that bind the respectable society to its criminalized other. The drawbridge doesn't keep crime out, it locks it inside.
So if we pull all the way back and connect this to the grand narrative arc of the novel,
Okay, let's zoom out.
Pip's entire refined, sensitive, educated existence, his fancy clothes, his extensive library of books, his delicate feelings, his ability to court Estella, is literally directly paid for by the blood, sweat, and brutalization of a man suffering in an Australian penal colony.
Yes. Dickens is arguing that the gentleman and the criminal are completely interdependent.
You cannot have one without the other.
Refinement and corruption are two sides of the exact same coin. The wealth that allows Pip to sit in a parlor reading poetry was extracted from the mud by a man in leg irons.
Even at the very end of the novel, this dark truth persists. Dickens attempts a sort of last-minute rehabilitation for Pip.
He tries to wrap it up.
The fairy tale is dead, Pip is humbled, and he eventually gets a respectable, hard-working, middle-class job as a clerk at his friend Herbert Clarriker's shipping firm. It looks like he has finally embraced the honest, Smilesian work ethic.
But the text won't let us rest comfortably even there. How did Herbert Clarriker get the capital to start that firm in the first place?
Pip bought Herbert's partnership for him, in secret, using Magwitch's money.
Exactly. Even Pip's final, stable, supposedly honest identity as a hardworking clerk is built on a foundation of tainted criminal money.
Wow.
The money that buys his redemption is the exact same money that caused his crisis. Dickens leaves his readers with a radical, unsettling skepticism.
Which is?
In a profoundly unequal, class-ridden society, true moral progress might just be an illusion because it is fundamentally inseparable from the exploitation of the marginalized. The system is rigged from the foundation up.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's quickly recap the journey we've just taken, because seeing how all these pieces interlock is crucial for understanding the genius of this novel. We started by looking at the hypocrisy of the Victorian economic boom, where the grueling hustle of the middle class was just a vehicle to achieve a lazy, unproductive aristocratic status.
Right.
We saw how Dickens weaponized characters like Trabb's boy and Joe Gargery to break the rules of the traditional coming-of-age story, dragging those elite gentlemanly codes straight into the mud.
We then explored how the chaotic, mass-produced print market gave Dickens the tools to smash the solidarity of signs.
Yeah.
He abandoned safe domestic realism and imported the terrifying, subversive logic of peasant fairy tales into Satis House, turning the fairy godmother into a rotting corpse.
We tracked Pip's resulting psychological disintegration, the feverish, untethered nightmare of Book 3, culminating in the smoke of Orlick's lime kiln.
Such a powerful scene.
And finally, we pull back the curtain to reveal the ultimate secret, that all of this high society respectability, from Jagger's law office to Pip's tailored suits, is secretly powered by the exploitation of the criminal underworld.
It is a breathtaking, systematic deconstruction of a society's most cherished foundational myths. Which leads me to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
Okay, leave us with something good.
If Dickens so brilliantly exposes that Pip's polite, beautiful, refined society is completely dependent on the invisible suffering of a marginalized, criminalized underclass, what does that say about the invisible foundations of our own modern world?
That is the real question, isn't it?
Look around at the pristine institutions in your own life. Look at the frictionless conveniences you enjoy, the technology you use, the clothes you wear. Whose invisible labor, whose suffering, whose marginalization is acting as the magwitch holding your respectable world up?
That's a heavy thought.
We like to think we have evolved past Victorian inequality, but Dickens forces us to ask if we've merely outsourced the brutality to places we can't see.
That is a haunting, brilliant place to end. It brings us right back to where we started. When you look at society or a piece of literature as complex as this, expecting to see a clean binary X-ray of right and wrong, you're going to be disappointed.
You definitely are.
Dickens forces us to put down the X-ray, roll up our sleeves, and wade straight into the muddy waters of human complicity. He forces us to accept a world where the fairy godmother is a monster, the monster is a benefactor, and the beautiful mansion is built directly on top of a graveyard.
Beautifully said.
If you're prepping for an exam, you now have the tools to absolutely ace it. Keep asking the hard questions, keep looking for the invisible foundations, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive.